They drafted a man who hated violence. They sent him to hell on earth, and he walked out with an entire German army as his prisoners. Every scar tells a story. Some heal, some don't. I'm the sergeant. These are the battle scars of those who served.
Thou shalt not kill. It is one of the oldest commandments in human history. 6 simple words carved into stone. For a man named Alvin York, those words weren't just a rule. They were a way of life. Alvin York was a man of the mountains. He grew up in the backwoods of Pall Mall, Tennessee. He was a blacksmith, a church elder, a man who spent his Sundays praying and his weekdays working the red clay earth. He was a gentle giant who believed that violence was a sin against God. But in 1917, the United States Army didn't care about his Bible. They drafted him. They put a rifle in his hands, shipped him across the Atlantic, and dropped him into the mud of France. They told him to kill. He told them he couldn't. On his draft card he wrote, "Don't want to fight." But on October 8, 1918, in a dark, mist-covered forest in the Argonne, the pacifist from Tennessee would find himself alone, surrounded by the German army, outnumbered 20-1. And on that day, Alvin York didn't just break the commandment. He shattered it. The Meuse Argonne Offensive. It was the deadliest battle in American history. A meat grinder of mud, barbed wire, and machine gun fire. On the morning of October 8th, Corporal York and his unit, the 82nd Division, were ordered to take Hill 223. The objective was a German railway supply line, but the Germans knew they were coming. As York and his platoon moved into the valley, the trap snapped shut. German machine guns, hidden on the ridges above, opened fire. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Within seconds, 9 Americans were dead. The officers were cut down. The sergeant was wounded. The platoon was pinned down in the mud, unable to move, unable to retreat. The German fire was so intense it was shearing the branches off the trees above their heads. Alvin York found himself lying in the dirt. He was a corporal, which meant he was now in charge of the handful of survivors. He looked up at the ridge. He saw the muzzle flashes of over 30 German machine guns. He realized that if he didn't do something, every single man in that valley was going to die. York didn't charge. He didn't scream. He did what he had done since he was a boy, hunting in the mountains of Tennessee. He got calm. He crawled into a position where he could see the German gunners, but they couldn't see him. He nestled his Enfield rifle into the mud. He took a deep breath, and he began to work. York was a sharpshooter of almost supernatural ability. In the chaos of World War I, where men sprayed bullets blindly, York fired once. Crack. A German gunner dropped. Crack. Another one. He wasn't fighting a war anymore. He was back in the turkey shoots of Pall Mall. He later said, "Every time I saw a German, I just touched him off." He didn't miss. He was picking them off with such rhythm and precision that the Germans thought they were facing an entire squad of snipers. But it was just one man. One man who hated violence, methodically dismantling a machine gun battalion. The German commander on the ridge, a lieutenant, realized that the fire was coming from a single position. He blew a whistle. 6 German soldiers fixed their bayonets. They climbed out of their trench and charged down the hill toward York. Their plan was simple: rush him while he was reloading his rifle. They were screaming. Their bayonets were lowered. They were 30 yards away. Then 20. York's rifle was empty. He didn't have time to reload. He dropped the rifle and drew his sidearm, a Colt .45 automatic pistol. Now, this is the moment where training usually takes over. A soldier is taught to shoot the closest threat first. But Alvin York wasn't a soldier. He was a hunter. He knew that if he shot the man at the front of the line, The 5 men behind him would drop to the ground and take cover. They would be harder to kill. So York did something that defies logic. He shot the man in the back of the line first. Bang! The last man fell. The others didn't notice. They kept running. Bang! He shot the second to last man. He shot them from back to front, like a flock of ducks. He dropped them one by one, moving up the line, until the leader, the man closest to him, was the only one left. York put a bullet in him before he could swing his bayonet. 6 shots. 6 bodies. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire. On the ridge, the German major, a man named Paul Vollmer, had watched the whole thing. He had seen his machine gunners picked off. He had seen his bayonet charge annihilated by a single pistol. He emptied his own pistol at York, missing every shot. York didn't even flinch. He just reloaded. Major Vollmer was a veteran officer. He knew when he was beaten. But he made a mistake. He assumed he was fighting a supernatural force. Vollmer climbed down from his position and walked toward York with his hands up. He asked in English, "Are you English?" In World War I, the Germans respected the British more than the Americans. They couldn't believe an American doughboy could shoot like that. York looked at him, his face covered in mud, his eyes hard. He said, "No, I'm American." The major looked at the pile of dead bodies. He looked at York's pistol. He said, "If you don't shoot anymore, I will make them surrender." York didn't smile. He pointed his .45 at the major's head and said, "You better." The major blew a whistle. One by one, German soldiers began to stand up from the trenches. Hands raised. York's men, the few survivors left in the brush, couldn't believe their eyes. They stepped out to herd the prisoners. But there was a problem. There were too many of them. York had captured 132 German soldiers. There were only 7 Americans to guard them. If the Germans realized how badly they outnumbered their captors, they would jump them. So York ran the greatest bluff of the war. He stuck his pistol in the major's back. He ordered the major to walk in front. He told him to march the prisoners straight toward the American lines. Every time they passed another German machine gun nest, York would poke the major in the ribs and tell him to order them to surrender too. The major, terrified of this hillbilly with the devil's aim, obeyed. They marched like that for miles. When they finally reached the American forward command post, the sentry shouted, "Halt! Who goes there?" York replied, "Corporal York, with prisoners." The lieutenant looked at the sea of gray German uniforms. He looked at York. He said, "Prisoners? Jesus, York! Did you capture the whole damn German army?" York just shrugged. "I only got 132 of them, sir." Alvin York tried to go back to being a quiet man. He didn't want the medals. He didn't want the fame. When they tried to give him the Medal of Honor, he initially refused it. He said he was just doing what he had to do to save his friends. He returned to Tennessee, to the red clay and the quiet Sundays. But the world never forgot the day in the Argonne Forest. General John Pershing called him the greatest civilian soldier of the war. But perhaps the most telling quote came from the German major himself. Years later, when asked about the surrender, he said simply, "It was not a man I surrendered to. It was a force of nature." The man who didn't want to fight ended the war as its greatest hero. He proved that sometimes the most dangerous man on the battlefield isn't the one who loves war. It's the one who wants to end it, so he can go home. This is Sergeant Narrates. Aim small, miss small.